Thank you for joining us for the IDA's 2020 Legislative Update. I'm Sharon Presnell. I'm Senior Vice President of Government Relations. Also presenting today is Jenica Lensmeyer. Jenica heads up our advocacy and grassroots efforts, and she's also doing some lobbying, particularly at the federal level. And Mike Rosenboom. Mike started with us in July, and he will be at the Capitol with me this legislative session. And our state legislative session begins the second week in January, so it's right around the corner. For our agenda today, we're going to have a federal legislative and regulatory update, and Jenica is going to provide that for us. Also, Mike and I will do a tag team on state legislative issues, and then Jenica will wrap it up with an overview on 2020 elections, advocacy, and then also talk about funding for BUILD, which is our PAC, and iLead, which is IBA's Super PAC. Jenica?
All right, so just to get started, I wanted to kind of give you an update on what's going on at the federal level and who represents Iowa currently. So this is the 1st District. Congresswoman Abby Finkenauer is serving her first term. She does plan to run for re-election. There's a two-way primary on the Republican side. Notably, though, Representative Ashley Hinson from Marion is running for that seat. So we're certainly paying close attention to that. In the 2nd District, which is the southeast side of Iowa, that is Dave Loebsack, who has announced that he is retiring. In that seat, we have Rita Hart, and it's a two-way Democratic primary, but she ran with Fred Hubble for lieutenant governor. And then there are two Republicans running, Senator Miller Meeks. This is her 4th time running for this seat, and Bobby Schilling, who is from the Quad Cities area, but he served as an Illinois congressman. So that will certainly be an interesting race. In the 3rd District is Congresswoman Axne, also her first term. She serves on the Financial Services Committee, so we've been working together with her on banking-related issues. She does plan to run for re-election, and she is supported by Bank PAC, which is our federal PAC. There are multiple candidates in that primary for the Republicans, with David Young, who is who she beat in 2018 as one of those. So it'll be an interesting race as well. And then we have the 4th District, which is the northwest side of the state. That is Congressman King. He does plan to run again, and there are 4 other Republican candidates running for that, one of which is Senator Feenstra, who's an Iowa senator. And then the Democrat is J.D. Scholten, who is the same one that ran against King in 2018. So those are the congressional races, as well as Senator Ernst. So those are the committees that she serves on. She will be running for re-election and is also supported by Bank PAC. And for her race, there are multiple candidates running on the Democratic side as well. So that will be an interesting race to watch too. And then our other senator, Senator Grassley, he's not up for re-election this time. But those are the committees he serves on. Obviously, Committee on Finance, very important to our industry, and as well as all the committees that directly impact our state. So moving to federal legislative and regulatory issues, these are the ones that we're working on currently. There are many others, however, these are ones that we've seen movement on or that are always at the top of our list. So the first is AML, BSA, and beneficial ownership reform. HR 2513, which is the Corporate Transparency Act, passed the House in October, and it's now in the Senate. This legislation created a federal beneficial ownership registry that would require corporations and LLCs to self-report beneficial owners to FinCEN at the time of corporate formation. This legislation also reformed BSA and AML to provide greater information sharing tools for banks and law enforcement. ABA expects that the Senate will take up S 2563, which is similar legislation, but is the Bipartisan Illicit Cash Act. The difference is that this allows LLCs to not report annually to FinCEN if they've had no ownership changes. So we're watching this at the federal level. Brokered deposits and national rate cap. The FDIC just issued last week a proposal to modernize the existing brokered deposit rules. This clarifies the definition of deposit broker. It establishes an application and reporting process for depository institutions wishing to utilize the rule's primary purpose exception. These rules haven't been updated in almost 3 decades, and so it's expected to get considerable attention on Capitol Hill. For cannabis banking, there's a couple pieces of legislation, but overall it provides a safe harbor for banks from federal prosecution when they're working with a cannabis or cannabis-related business that complies with state laws. The legislation passed the House with bipartisan support, however, is stalled in the Senate as the committee chairman, Crapo, has some changes that he would like to see made before they move forward. So that's where we stand on that. For CRA, ABA said that there is a very high chance that the House Financial Services Committee will devote a considerable amount of time to this in the next session, beginning of the year. So we're looking forward to seeing some changes, modernizing CRA. And then, of course, credit unions in the Farm Credit System, specifically for credit unions, we're working to remove the 501c1 federal instrumentality status for federally chartered credit unions, which requires IRS information and compensation reporting and makes federal credit unions subject to the unrelated business income tax. And then for the Farm Credit System, we're working on ECORA, which would remove the taxation on interest from ag real estate loans, giving banks the same tax status as the Farm Credit System when making no farm real estate loans. And the other thing for Farm Credit System is we're always encouraging Congress to have annual oversight hearings to hold them accountable.
Moving on to state government, just wanted to give a quick breakdown of the makeup of the legislature by party. So starting in the House, Republicans currently retain a 53 vote majority with 47 Democrats in the House of Representatives. Going into the 2019 session, that number would have been 54-46, but there was one legislator who switched from Republican to Democrat, giving us those numbers. Over in the Senate, strong Republican majority there, getting close to a supermajority, but 32 Republican senators to 18 Democratic senators.
I might add there, Mike, just by way of interest, that that number in the Senate grew substantially after they voted in support of the credit union bill. And as a matter of fact, on the House side, they lost members when they failed to pass the credit union tax bill in 2018. So I think that's interesting. Just to run over really quickly the key leaders on the Senate side first, I would say that all of these people are relatively new. Senator Charles Snyder is the president of the Senate. He is from West Des Moines, and he served last year as the president, but he's only got 1 year under his belt. And then Senator Jack Whitfer is the majority leader. He is from Ankeny, and he has the same 1 year under his belt, serving as in the leadership position. Key committee leaders for us is Senator Jake Chapman. He is going to be new this year, leading the Ways and Means Committee as the chair, and he is replacing Randy Feenstra, who Jenica already said is running in the 4th District against Congressman King. And then for the Commerce Committee chair, we have Senator Dan Dawson. Senator Dawson is from Council Bluffs, and he is also new, replacing Senator Chapman, who was last year the chair of the Commerce Committee. So a lot of new people. I should say that Senator Chapman is from Adel. All very, very good supporters of the banking industry, I might add.
Over on the House side of things, you may have heard Speaker Linda Uppmeyer decided to step down from the speakership. She'll remain in the legislature, but will not be Speaker. So with recent leadership elections, Speaker Pat Grassley was chosen to become the Speaker, and he's from New Hartford, Iowa, and you've probably heard his last name a time or two before, the grandson of Chuck Grassley. As part of his leadership team, have a brand new leader, Representative Matt Winchittle from Western Iowa, Missouri Valley over there. Matt was formerly the Speaker pro tem over in the House, so does have a little leadership experience there, and should be a great new team. For key committee leaders, Representative Lee Hine from Monticello, Iowa, will be in his second session as Ways and Means Chair, and Representative Gary Carlson from Muscatine will be heading up the Commerce Committee in the House.
I might also add, with regard to Gary Carlson, is he was kind of the point person for the credit union issue, and so he's done a lot of work on that issue over the interim. Which brings us to some of the state issues, and I do want to start talking a little bit right off the bat about our industry priorities. Obviously, first and foremost is the financial institution tax equity. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background about where we've been, most of you are aware that in 2018 there was a big tax reform bill, and we did have a provision that passed on the Senate side that would tax banks and credit unions alike. The way we did that is we set a threshold of $7.5 million, and any income above that threshold for both industries was taxed at 4%, and any income below that threshold was taxed at 2%. So that did pass the Senate. It did not make it through the entire session. It was taken out by the House, and the Senate did not put it back in, and so it did not become law. So that brought us to the 2019 session last year, and we started out with that Senate bill that I just described to you, and we had a small group of Republicans working on that legislation. And we were making, we thought, very good progress. We felt strongly that we had enough votes to get that bill out of the Ways and Means Committee, and about halfway through the session, we were called into the leader's office. At that time, as Mike said, it was Linda Uppmeyer, and she indicated that she simply did not have the votes to get that bill passed. So she wanted us to go back and come up with an idea that would be something less than a tax of credit unions that would be helpful for banks. And so we went back to our board and we did that. We had that discussion, and we ended up coming out with what we referred to as a field of membership bill. And what that particular piece of legislation did was it limited state-chartered credit unions to the same field of membership as a federally chartered credit union had. And by way of explanation, and I'll use Green State as the example here, if loosely, that would allow them, if they had the same field of membership as if they were a federally chartered credit union, basically they would be allowed to have Johnson County and the surrounding counties as their field of membership. And then under the transition rules, if they were to flip from a state charter to a federal charter, the federal rules would allow them to maintain all of their offices and all of their members in those offices, but they could only add new members in that Johnson County and surrounding county area. They could not add any new members in any of the branches that fell outside of that federal field of membership area. So we felt, pretty good about that compromise, as we called it, but it was late in the session. And although we did feel like the leaders were working on our part, it just was too late, and it didn't happen. It didn't take place. So that brings us to 2020. And I think a lot of different things could happen. I mean, it's possible that we could continue to look at, the Senate bill that passed in 2018. We had a lot of discussion about that during the summer months. In fact, we got into a room with the credit union industry, and we had a 3-hour debate with Gary Carlson and Matt Winchittle, who is one of the new leaders on the House side. And we talked about a lot of different options. That was one of the options. We also talked about the field of membership issue, which we think is still an option. And then also, as Jenica referred to, at the federal level, they're looking at that ECORA bill. And so we're looking at that at the state level as well. And at the state level, we might go a little bit further. We might look at a bank being able to deduct the interest earned from, maybe commercial loans, ag loans, whatever we might decide. But I think all of those things are on the table. All of those issues are potential options. And so we'll have to see what happens.
Moving on to central filing and the drying and storage lien, you see there, this issue became a legislative issue arising out of some litigation between a bank and an ag cooperative about some charges for storage and drying. This led the co-op industry to introduce some legislation way at the end of session last year, kind of caught everybody off guard. That would give them a super priority, automatically perfected lien on whatever drying and storage charges. Of course, this took Iowa bankers by surprise, and we were able to work with our representatives and legislators and have that language removed, but have been engaged in discussions with the co-op industry and other agricultural groups this session to try hammer out a path forward. Again, we expect the co-ops to bring a super priority lien legislation that would allow them the right to automatically set off their costs for storage and drying against whatever they're owed. Currently, they're not allowed to do so, as several courts have agreed with us on that. But that kind of brings us into the central filing piece of this. We, like I said, have engaged the co-op industry and the grain buying industry in discussions on finding a way to improve the system and mitigate risk for everybody. And from IBA's perspective, the best way to do that is to introduce a central filing system, which is essentially, our goal would be to make it a lot like the current UCC system, where all of you have sent many filings, I'm sure, but it would just be a simple, essentially a UCC search, as opposed to banks having to send out paper notices to any potential buyer of this farmer's grain. So from IBA's perspective, we are certainly willing to find a way to make the system better for everyone, and for us that starts with a central filing system.
I might add on that the litigation in question that Mike referred to is still ongoing. The bank did win the case, but it is being appealed, and we don't know if it's going to go to the Supreme Court or the Supreme Court will push it back to the lower court. But that case is not likely to be decided until after session. So really, we're fine if nothing happens and in the legislature and we just wait to see what happens with the lawsuit. But if we want to try to resolve the issue before that lawsuit is finally resolved one way or another, we are willing to come to the table on that. But whatever solution that we agree on, it's going to have to include central filing. One of the things that we've talked about is whether or not we would provide the co-ops with a prior perfected lien as to March of the year after the grain was harvested. So that's something we might consider. But anything we consider has to have central filing as a part of the solution. The other things I just wanted to mention, because we get involved in a lot of these issues, but they are really issues that are going to be coming forth one way or another from the majority party and from the governor's office likely. Clearly they have to pass a budget. And so that's always number one priority. They can't go home. Unlike Congress, the state can't go home without passing a budget. So they will do that. And right now you think, well, this is going to be easy to do because they have a $400 million surplus and they have over $800 million in reserve. But sometimes that can be very difficult because there's a lot of programs that, you know, a lot of folks might think are being underfunded. There's a lot of tax priority issues. You know, they passed their tax reform bill in 2018, and that's still being rolled out. They have triggers they have to meet, and so the Republicans are going to want to try to preserve that ending balance so that those triggers will be met and they can go forward with that full tax cut that they are planning on for individual taxpayers. Corporate was not included in that. So that's clearly going to be a big issue. Funding for broadband in rural Iowa, that's been an issue that we've been very supportive of. The governor had asked for $20 million last year, got $5 million. So they're coming back this year. They're, of course, wanting a total of $15 million. And then we know that there's going to be a lot of workforce issues and rural housing issues. And so we're busy working with the legislature on what some of those things might look like.
Of course, those aren't the only issues we'll deal with this year. Several other topics that we're expecting to hear about and be engaged in conversations on. First one would be voluntary reporting of financial abuse. We certainly know that our bankers want to be able to report when they suspect some exploitations going on, but the real important thing on that issue is to make sure it's not a mandatory reporting. We want to keep it voluntary and make sure you guys can help your customers when you see it, but aren't forced to do anything where you may make a mistake. You know, another one would be ancient mortgages, and this is more of an issue that kind of cleans up some things that to bring Iowa's current mortgage, ancient mortgage requirement up to speed, bring us to a 30-year mortgage there. Another smaller compliance issue would be notice requirements on open-end accounts. We've submitted a bill to the legislature and are working with several legislators on that issue. Lottery savings accounts. Credit unions have brought this bill several times in the past and essentially just enter you into some kind of prize giveaway or lottery for opening up an account. And we're opposed to this legislation. We think it's bad from a financial literacy standpoint and believe that strongly. So we'll be engaged on that issue in opposition. IBA has also taken part in a task force to study the definition of computer for sales tax purposes. There was some misalignment between some national sales tax language that Iowa does use and our current administrative rules. So the legislature set up a task force to examine that and come up with a better definition for computers. Another one we're likely to see is some land bank legislation viewed as an economic development tool for communities and municipalities. We are monitoring this legislation, think there's some things we can do to make it easier on our bankers as they get into the community and try to clean up some old abandoned buildings with this, but just something we're keeping an eye on. And several trust issues we expect to see, some cleanup to the guardianship and conservatorship law that takes effect here on January 1. Hopefully be able to do some things to update our probate code to allow us to better compete with neighboring states like South Dakota. And then some transfer on death of real estate, asset inheritance tax issues there as well. Last thing we're kind of just starting the process on, but is the Iowa Division of Banking Modernization Act, which is a modernization of the banking code. And we've now begun working with the superintendent of banking and the division, as well as other interested parties, in reviewing the current code and making recommendations to improve it.
Thanks, Mike. If anybody wanting more information on any of these issues, and I know that's a lot of issues and trying to just provide a little brief explanation, but you can go out to our website and there'll be more information available on each of these issues. But we did want to outline them briefly because these are issues that we've already identified are going to be issues. They're either pre-filed bills or they're bills that we've actually filed. Both the ancient mortgage and the notice requirements for open-end accounts are issues that we're bringing forward. And so we know these are all issues that we're going to be dealing with. If you want more information about those, please go out to the website, or of course, as always, feel free to call the IBA staff at any time.
All right, so talking about the website, moving into the 2020 election tools, we do have our caucus page up and running. So for all information that you need about Caucus 101, it has the information for Republicans and Democrats, what you can expect if you haven't participated before, even if you have. It lists, you can enter in your address and it'll shows you who's all running in the 2020 election too, so to go a little beyond the caucus. So I encourage you to go out and look at that. Again, you can get to that through the Iowa Bankers Association website. If you go to Government Relations and Voter Education, it'll take you to this page. So all the information that you need is there, but if you have additional questions, I know I've heard from a few people already, feel free to just email me directly and I will help you if I can. As far as advocacy goes, so during the legislative session, we encourage bankers to attend a few different things. First of all, we encourage you to set up capital visits for your bank. Usually we do those between the beginning of session and Bankers Day on the Hill, so anytime in January, February, March on a Tuesday or Wednesday are usually the best days. So I know we have a few banks that have already signed up to bring groups, so if you are interested in doing that, I would highly recommend it. If you've been to our other two events, you will know that the capital visits tend to be more of a one-on-one experience, whereas the other two, a lot of legislators and a lot of bankers. So those two are more about numbers. So it's nice to get that one-on-one interaction with your bank and legislators. The legislative reception is in conjunction with the management conference. That's on February 5th from 4:30 to 6:30. So if you're attending the management conference, we encourage you to stick around for that. Please do understand that the longer you can stay, the better. Oftentimes they're not done until 5-ish and sometimes a little later. And so we do have legislators that filter in throughout the night. And we try to direct them to bankers from their area. So if you can stay, that's definitely helpful. I would also encourage you to reach out to your legislator in advance so that they know that you're planning to attend. And then you can be in touch with them directly about what time they're planning to get there, so you can make sure that you're there. But if you're not attending the management conference, you can attend the legislative reception for free. So please feel free to still attend that even if you can't be at the conference. And then Bankers Day on the Hill is April 1st this year. Same kind of setup as last year. It'll begin at 10. It'll last until just after lunch till about 2. And so get that on your calendar, and please send people from your bank to attend that. And then I should also add, now that the congressional calendar is out, at the federal level, the IBA Capitol Hill visit will be June 9th through the 11th in Washington, D.C. To go towards the PAC side of things, this year we've raised just over $197,000 for Build. Our goal for next year is $200,000, so we would love to hit that, of course, going into an election year. These funds will go directly to candidates for office. We give to those that support the banking industry. These are personal contributions, so we don't accept corporate contributions for Build. However, iLead is our super PAC, and so corporate contributions are allowed for iLead, and we use those funds to educate policymakers and the public on issues important to our industry. So the funds in both are equally important and for different reasons. And so I would encourage you to be active in that. And I will show you on our website here, you can see at the bottom, Build and iLead are available on the voter education site if you go to this page. And so you can get online for Build. But all the materials will be there and updated after the first of the year, and then we'll send out the campaign packets towards the end of January.
Thank you all for joining us. That wraps up what we wanted to talk about. We appreciate your advocacy, and let's all go out and have a great session and build this great industry that we all love so much. Thank you again, and we will see you hopefully at the Capitol this session.